Hello, everyone. My name is Xiaoting Shi. I'm a fourth-year PhD student from Yale School of Public Health. It's my great honor today to have this opportunity to present our work. Since we are in the pandemic science session, I want to kind of shift gears and go back to the topic that we've talked about in this morning, which is about retractions, another interesting facet of scientific research. So as introduced, the topic of our study is comparison of the characteristics of COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 retractions. And here is the list of other co-authors from our team. So before we start, I want to briefly present the founding information of our study, as well as the potential conflicts of interest from our team. One thing I like to highlight here is that two authors from our team developed and maintained the Retraction Watch database, which is essentially a database that identifies and tracks retractions. And that's also a database we used in our study. So a little bit of the background. Manuscript retractions represent attempts to officially withdraw published papers or posted preprints that contain errors or involve fraud or other kinds of misconduct. Due to an increased interest in research integrity, greater efforts have been made to understand the process of retraction. And as a result, we have seen an increased number of retracted papers every year. So for instance, before 2000, less than 100 papers were retracted per year on average. However, there were more than 1,700 papers that were retracted in 2019 alone. And more recently, concerns have been raised about the number of retracted COVID-19 studies. Well, part of this might be due to the greater level of scrutiny COVID-19 studies were subject to. Little is actually known about the potential differences between retracted COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 studies. So we ask ourselves this question and conduct a cross-sectional analysis looking at the potential differences between retracted COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 studies in terms of author characteristics and reasons for retractions. So to carry out our study, we first identified retractions of publications and withdrawals of preprints that were indexed in the Retraction Watch database between February 1st, 2020, the very beginning of the pandemic, all the way to May 5th, 2022. And then two authors and I recorded the following key information: the publication type, the study design, 2020 journal impact factor, the major retraction reasons, as well as the dates of retraction, which we used to calculate time to retraction. We also recorded the information about who requested the retractions and first and last authors' affiliations. Next, two researchers and I first searched Scopus and then Google Scholar to identify the author profiles of the first and last authors. From their and we verified their profiles by using their affiliations. And from their author profiles, we recorded information about year of first publication, as well as their Edge indexes. So here, Edge index is what we use as an imperfect proxy for researchers' experience. Essentially, a higher Edge index indicates a researcher has published more papers with higher number of citations. Then we also conducted several statistical analyses to compare the differences between COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 retracted studies. So here are our major results. So as of May 5th, 2022, we included a total number of 518 retracted studies, which included 138 COVID-19 related retractions and 380 non-COVID-19 retractions. So we first took a look at the publication manuscripts, publication characteristics, and we found For publication type, none of the non-COVID-19 retracted studies were preprints. And in comparison, you can see from the table, more than a quarter of the COVID-19 retracted studies, they were preprints. And then we took a look at the time to retraction, and we found COVID-19 retracted studies were more likely to be retracted within 6 months. In particular, you can see more than 80% of COVID-19 retracted studies were retracted within half a year. And then the next category we looked at is reasons for retraction. So for this one, we first identify the retraction notice of each retracted study, and we identify the most prominent reason for retraction and group them across these categories. So first, we have lack of adherence to journal policies or ethics issues. And the second one is duplication of data, image, test, or articles. Third one is errors, including errors conducting and reporting the study results. And the fourth one is falsification or fabrication. The fifth one is plagiarism. And the last category is what we call non-misconduct related concerns, issues, or unspecified reasons. So for reasons for retraction, we found retracted COVID-19 studies were more likely due to non-misconduct related or unspecified reasons or concerns. In particular, you can see from the table, more than 60% of COVID-19 retracted studies were retracted due to non-misconduct or unspecified concerns. And in comparison, roughly 1/3 of the non-COVID-19 studies were retracted due to this reason. So the last category we looked at is other characteristics. In particular, we looked at year of first publication and H-index of the first and last authors. And we found authors of COVID-19 retracted studies had higher H-indexes and longer publication histories compared to authors of non-COVID-19 retracted studies. So these are our major findings. And there are two limitations I wanted to highlight. First, our study sample is limited to all the studies that were indexed in the Retraction Watch database. Although Retraction Watch is the most comprehensive database for retraction so far, it's still likely that some papers may not be entered into the database as of the date of our study. And second, we identified the most prominent reason of retraction from the retraction notices. However, retraction notices are not uniform across different publishers, which makes it challenging for us to establish the primary reason for each retracted studies. So in conclusion, the major take-home message from our study is that we observed differences between retracted COVID-19 and retracted non-COVID-19 related studies in terms of author characteristics and reasons for retractions. In particular, first, COVID-19 retracted studies had more experienced first and last authors with higher H-index and longer publication histories. And second, retracted COVID-19 studies may not be more likely to involve fraud or other kinds of misconduct. So all this information suggests that currently COVID-19 studies may be under a higher level of scrutiny from the research community. And in the morning session, I remember some fantastic speakers mentioned that in the future, it would be great if there are more immediate alerts from the citation systems to help us identify these retractions, as well as the more speedy retraction actions from the authors or journals. So there are two other potential implications from our study. First, there are opportunities for more uniform retraction notices across different publishers. And second, there are also opportunities for more careful examination of manuscripts overall, both COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 related. And all these efforts can help us better understand why studies were retracted and eventually can help us enhance the research integrity and transparency of future studies. So I want to thank the Peer Review Congress for inviting us and giving us this fantastic opportunity to present our work. I also want to thank the audience from Zoom and in person that joins us to listen to my talk. I also want to give a huge thank you to everyone in our team for their great input. I'm happy to take questions or comments. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Xiaoting.
Thank you.
Question right here.
Okay, thank you. Well, this is great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's really interesting and it shows that the differences are not that large between COVID retractions and other retractions. And also when you look at the frequency, they seem to be quite equal as well. My question is about the retraction notices. You looked at a lot of them. And the experience of people investigating is that they are not only not standardized, but they're also quite vague about reasons for retraction. And that might be due to legalistic reasons because journals don't want to be sued for their retraction notices. But do you agree that it would be a good idea to standardize specifically the reasons for retractions with a clear focus on the paper and not so much whether there was an intentionality or whether there was a culprit and whether it was completely confirmed? What was wrong with the article that we should standardize in a way that should be the same in many journals, not only in medicine, but also in other disciplines. So there is such room to improve retraction notices. Do you agree? And what are your observations in these notices? Because you study so many of them.
This is a great question. So as you can see from our table, the most common reason for retracted COVID-19 studies is that they are retracted for unspecified or non-misconduct related reasons. And when I was doing my study, when I was collecting the data, I also realized retraction notices, they are very different. And some of the retraction notice, they are very detailed. They outline who initiated the retraction and who agreed to the retraction and what's the follow-up reaction, like if it's republished, etc. So I definitely agree that retraction notices, they should be uniform, or at least the key components should be reported across these retraction notices. Thank you for your question.
Thanks. Go back there and then to the internet.
Hi, my name is Usman. Thanks so much for your talk. This may be a bit speculative, but could you speak a bit about why you think the authors of COVID-19 studies were more experienced compared to authors of non-COVID-19 studies for the retractions you found?
This is a really interesting question. So usually we will expect authors, if they are more experienced, they will conduct more rigorous research. So I don't really know the mechanism behind it, but one of my speculation is that maybe these authors, although they are very experienced in their field, but maybe like COVID-19 is not their major fields. They are not really working on infectious epidemiology or other relevant fields. So it could be one of the reasons why these studies, these authors of COVID-19 retracted studies are more experienced. But also, as I've mentioned in my talk, it also could be that currently these COVID-19 studies, they are under a high level of scrutiny from the research community.
Online.
Dr. Matthew Stanbrook from CMAJ says you studied both published articles and preprints. Presumably the same study would sometimes occur in both formats. Were such studies retracted from both or only retracted from journals and not from the preprint server?
Good question. So we work with the team from Retraction Watch database. They comprehensively identify and tracks these retractions of preprints and publications. At least in our sample, the sample I included, there's no duplication of the same paper of the preprints and following publication, but I can't really say outside of the study sample I worked on. Thank you for the question.
Thanks. Stage right and then stage left.
Hi, Nihar from Carnegie Mellon University. Thanks for the great talk. And my question was very similar to Osman's earlier about possible reasons for H-index, et cetera, of retracted COVID-19 authors being higher. And with two hypotheses, one is what you said, that is people from other areas jumping in. And second, maybe because this was more rushed because of the urgency of the situation. So I was just curious to know, like, if not a formal study, maybe have you eyeballed the data and like, do you have any kind of thoughts about it?
We did record the study type, but we didn't actually record about like the particular field the researchers were working in. But I think this is a really interesting question, and I'll be happy to go back to the data set. And if you're interested in, you can follow up me with the results.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Here, back there, and then here.
Anna Marušić, University of Split, Croatia. Thank you. I will just go back to Lexi's question. Would it be useful to have something like we have credit for authorship, that we have some kind of a matrix for retraction notices, that you kind of have a checklist of what you have to report? I think this is something that we can
And we
work
could
on.
call it discredit.
Discredit. Good idea. I wanted to ask you about, because you said in your abstract that also you saw more retractions from North American affiliations. Does that mean that there are many studies that should have been retracted that are not retracted? Because that result can be explained by a better awareness and existence of structures and processes for addressing misconduct and problems, whereas reports from other scientific communities may not be recognized and retracted on time. My last question, did you do some kind of regression analysis to identify the predictors of COVID retractions?
Oh, sure. So for the second question, we did not conduct regression analysis because as one of the first group looking at these questions, these comparisons, our goal is to provide a descriptive analysis of the basic characteristics between retracted COVID and non-COVID-19 studies. And as for your first question, I think it would be interesting to like give credit or discredit for these retractions or republications. But I also wanted to highlight that retractions don't really necessarily mean it's necessarily like misconduct.
Yeah, but
As you can
information, the completeness of information and transparency of why the paper was retracted. I was always thinking only about misconduct, but just the reasons for retraction.
Yeah, I think the reasons for retractions and like this information should be reported in the retraction notice, as well as other key components like if the authors or journals, they all agree to this retraction and what's the follow-up from this study, things like that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your question.
One online question, one real life question, and that'll be it.
Philip Kapp from the Institute for Evidence-Based Medicine in Freiburg, Germany asks, can you share information about the study designs of the retracted articles? And could the results be confounded? I think the answer is always yes. But the question is, for example, only experienced high H-index authors could have initiated COVID-19 studies in the early days of the pandemic.
So for study design, for the interest of time, I didn't put that information in my slides, but that's available in the book. So we found retracted COVID-19 studies, they were more likely to be modeling studies, which is also reasonable given the nature of some COVID-19 studies. For a second question, do mind repeating your question again?
The question was general about confounding, but the specific example of the association between experienced or high H index authors being more likely to be associated with retracted articles. Could that be because those experienced authors were the only ones who could mount up research quickly because of their resources?
This is an interesting question. Yeah, as I've mentioned, it could be these authors with more research experience. It could be that they conduct the study faster because of like during COVID, we all want the evidence to be readily available, and a lot of people want to publish their study quickly and have the results immediately disseminated to the research community. So we have this urge to publish the paper fast, especially during COVID. So it also could be the reason I've mentioned they're under a more detailed and higher level of scrutiny from our research community.
Short question and short answer.
Okay, quick question, then I'll go to the basic. So in the COVID studies, you had 61% wouldn't identify a problem as opposed to it was only like what, 30%. So my question is, what do you think the incentives, what do you think changed the policy that a lot of these journals would not say what the reason why with the COVID that they would with others? I mean, your research team, I'm sure this is the biggest problem, the disappointment. Is that?
So short answer is first, that category, we both have unspecified and non-misconduct related reasons, which are the reasons that we cannot put into, plagiarism or falsification. And I'm not really sure, but I think it could be that first COVID-19 studies, they were published faster. It also might be the retractions. They also, whoever initiate the retraction also want to initiate quickly to tell the research community that there's potential problems with this study. So be careful about the study results and conclusions from the study. It also could be the reason that because we only look at the retracted COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 studies, it could also be that retraction notice, they are just not very uniform. And this is what we actually observed between different publishers.
Thank you. We're going to have to cut it off there. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Yang.